Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week, we're coming at you with a brand new episode, just like every week. And we're going to talk about two new albums from two bands. We're talking about the latest mathcore release from the Dallas Cowboys, the Callous Daoboys, Celebrity Therapist. And we're also going to be talking about the latest album from Dave Mustaine and company, The Sick, The Dying, and the Queen of England.
Whoa, swing!
Hey! Speaking of which, look out for our record club this week, which is going to be on
a certain album. Dead. Last week we reviewed the two new albums from Jid and Muse. That was a really fun
Ryley
episode.
Just slowly having a stroke.
No, it was a really fun episode. How could I forget? Really fun episode with special guest Jen. We had a great talk about Jid's fantastic new album and Muse's latest album. And that was a really fun episode. Plus, we also had a really great record club with August where we talked about the legacy of one Tayo Cruz. I'm not all that surprised that this video is underperforming, considering, again, Tayo Cruz is not exactly a name that carries much weight. But I promise you, it is a good video, a really fun video.
Would have done better if we called it The Legacy of the Dynamite Guy. People would have been like, oh, yeah, him. Instead of like, who?
Yeah, exactly. But it is a fun video. Really proud of it. Go and check it out. Plus, of course, as well, our national retrospective continued this week with the 4th episode on the classic 2007 seminal indie rock release, Boxer. Go and check that out as well. But for now, we're here. We're queer. The Queen is dead. And it's time to get into what we've been listening to for the last week. Jake, what have you been listening to?
I think I took this week is an opportunity, first and foremost, to finally settle a bit of a internal debate that I've had for the longest time, just because I had not fully explored the back catalog of one Megadeth. And I also just kind of got I got a craving for some good classic thrash metal. And I was like, I've never really properly articulated my thoughts on like the ranking of the big four of thrash properly. I've never there's still a couple of albums from these bands that I haven't heard yet, so I feel like I can't come at all of them from a fully informed perspective. And thankfully, most of those albums that are not made by Metallica are like 30 minutes long. So basically I listened to every canonical 80s and occasionally 90s album in the thrash metal canon, so I could come at you with the definitive take on the ranking of the golden era of the big four, and generally speaking, just how good they were. And no surprises here. The best of the big four is still Metallica.
No shit!
I mean, we've talked about them at the very beginning of this podcast. One of my favorite 2-part videos we've ever done. That required little to no debate with me, is just because, I know, it probably seems like we're a little Metallica biased, but I feel like there was a reason we felt it necessary to cover them so early in our podcast tenure. And it's just because nobody has an album as good as Ride the Lightning, or multiple albums as good as Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets or And Justice for All. Those albums, just, they are a cut above even the best of what the other bands have to offer. And I really like what the other bands have to offer, but they don't rise to the occasion in terms of ambition, in terms of they just feel like more definitive heavy metal statements. And I feel like their success is partially representative of that. Not to say that, because they were the most successful, they're the best, but it's there is a reason why they were the band that made the Black Album. It was because they capitalized on the things that made them great. So unsurprisingly, I still think that Metallica is the best of the big four. Curiously, they are the best of the big four, and I would say indisputably, but they almost universally have lower lows than the other three. like, and more consistent lows. Even that sort of, you know, dip in their career in the 90s and 2000s is pretty disastrous. That said, I think that a solid second place, a pretty confident second place, from me at least, is I gotta give it to Slayer. Just because they have, like, do they have the totemic highs of Metallica? No. But what they do have is fucking consistency. That 80s run of albums is fucking faultless, from their debut, I mean, to the fucking 90s and like South of Heaven. It's like everybody is just at their fucking peak. You cannot fault a band that has Dave Lombardo going that fucking hard on all of those records. I would say that a deeply underrated album in their catalog that, like, you know, the world at large knows is great, but I don't hear people talk about, is in fact South of Heaven, which is just fucking fantastic. I'd say that's like my second favorite of theirs after the boring pick, which is Rain and Blood, which, I mean, it's like, you know, it's like 29 minutes long. It's just an incessant ass pounding of a record. So I am still a big fucking fan. And then there's the matter of the bottom two. And it's very difficult to decide this. And I had to reckon with a few things internally, but I do have to give the bronze medal to Megadeth. And it's really just because I don't think Anthrax...
to see it.
I do. And part of it is that I almost don't really think Anthrax doesn't feel like they belong in the big four. Like, of all of the thrash metal bands, like, Anthrax is a punk band. Like, I don't really think of them as metal in the strictest sense of the word, you know? And their canonical classics, you know, To Rid the Disease, and the following record, they're good, but they are easily the band that suffers the most from having production that just doesn't do them many favors. Those albums are good and they are consistent, but they simply just do not have the punch that they used to probably back in the day. They generally suffer from, like, and they just have a large portion of their catalog that's kind of unremarkable. I mean, they've got some good later era stuff, but it never really rises to the occasion. Whereas Megadeth, on the other hand, I mean, look, Rust in Peace is simultaneously an overrated ass album. I love it. Like, fucking banger. I love the shit out of it, in fact. Like, fucking Holy Wars, The Punishment Due, and Hangar 18, fucking 80s and 90s thrash. Just like, it doesn't get better than that shit right there, that 1-2 punch. And the rest of the album is also great. And surprisingly, I really enjoyed their other records that I didn't get back to until now, including one record of theirs, which is certainly considered, like, in the Megadeth canon, but, like, not quite to the extent of Peace Cells or Rust in Peace, and that's Countdown to Extinction. And, like, this album, I really love this album. It's also, like, there's a point on this album, y'all know what, where you hit a certain song and then the album pushes far past the threshold of ridiculousness that you were, like, previously like, you know what, this is dumb and stupid and goofy, but I'm with it. And then you get to Sweating Bullets, and then, like, everything after that is just like, all right, never mind, go pull back. Which, by the way, Sweating Bullets...
Hello, me, it's me again.
I deeply enjoy this song, but you just have my misfit way of life. And it is it trades its consistency, and, like, that's one of the reasons that I have to give it to Megadeth, is that, like, Mustaine in his day, like, in the earlier era of Megadeth, like, right in for, like, Killing Is My Business, this man was drunk and pissed off and had something to prove. And one of the reasons that Killing Is My Business is a really good debut is because they mix it so that you basically just can't hear Dave. Like, his vocals are present, you can't understand them at all, because the guitar is the main star of the show here. Like, you hear it more in Peace Cells and Rust in Peace and So Far So Good So What. But it manages to mic them, or at least produce them, in a way that feels like they suit the song. And then Countdown to Extinction is the moment where Dave Mustaine's presence in Megadeth becomes, like, at least a net neutral if not a net negative. And from then on, careers are a little spottier. And I have to say, I don't know if this is going to be a hot take or anything, but just aside from my ranking, I think it's funny that I would deem the weak point in each of these bands to be the frontmen. Like, not to, and I'm not trying to dismiss. I think James Hetfield is a great frontman.
It's Lars
but
Ulrich, dude.
Well, not in the '80s albums. James is like later he just sort of becomes a parody of himself, and his vocals become the way they are just so raw and unbridled on albums like Saint Anger. Just they do the band way more harm than good. And occasionally, even in his best moments, he's a bit of he can be a bit overbearingly silly, but like still confidently the best of these. Whereas you have Dave Mustaine, who's like if James had no restraint and also just wasn't quite as good of a singer. And then you have Slayer's frontman,
Also just sounded like a gremlin with constipation.
Like a little, just talks like a goblin man.
We'll fucking get to that. Jeez.
Oh, we will. But like Slayer's frontman is not bad, but he also just falls into the category of just like he really relies on that like talk singing, like especially on shit like Rain and Blood. It's just like the man is barely like approaching a melodic idea. You don't care because of the drumming and the guitar work, but like he gets the job done, but it doesn't quite get there. And then there's Anthrax, and the guy's just kind of shouty. Like he's all right, he's solid, he's decent, but like every instrumental presence on those classic records just stratospheric highs. So lots of great albums, lots of good stuff, lots of cringe, but also you just kind of learn to roll with the punches. But that is to say, I have a very positive opinion on lots of Megadeth albums, so I want you all to remember that once we get later into the podcast. On the other side of the spectrum, I ventured further into the discography of one Mr. Robert Dylan. I listened to two records.
Zimmerman.
Robert Allen Zimmerman. I listened to the next sort of another one of the records that are sort of in that like really beloved streak that like around Blonde on Blonde and Blood on the Tracks, and that is Desire. And Desire is fucking great. I even think I might narrowly prefer Desire to Blonde on Blonde just because it's a tighter record. It's 50 minutes, and it's sort of like I love the excess of Blonde on Blonde and how much of a party that feels, but this just sort of feels like it's him zeroing in on all of his best strengths, and the band behind him on this album is great. The fucking fiddles and strings on this, which are like very prominent on every single song, give these tracks a lot of awesome like momentum and some tonalities that are a little bit irregular for Dylan thus far. So I really appreciated that added element. And it's also, you know, it starts off with Hurricane, one of his best songs. And really it's like it's just a run of these great storytelling, like story-driven songs. And yeah, it has that one song on there about that's the basically true to life story about that gangster that's basically nothing but hagiography, but I don't care because that song is fucking awesome. It's like perfect. I don't care that it's based on a real guy that Dylan lionized. Like who gives
that's actually
song's great.
That song is like Joey, which is the song you're talking about, is one of the most like controversial Dylan songs, or not controversial but like divisive. Like a lot of fans kind of think that it's like, you know, the biggest flaw in this album is that song takes up like 11 minutes of it, and it's just, but like, yeah, I mean,
it's a great fucking song is the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I actually haven't heard Desire in full, but I have heard Hurricane, Isis, and Sarah. I mean, an album that starts with Hurricane and ends with Sarah. I mean, like, it almost doesn't even matter what's in between when you have those bookends. But I might, I might make a point to throw that on this week because I really need to listen to it in full.
Yeah, I would recommend it just because it's it is a little bit more concise. I mean, it's fucking 56 minutes long, but I mean, still, it feels like, it's still only 9 songs long, and these 9 songs feel fully formed, fully fleshed out. And they're, again, if you enjoy Dylan as a storyteller, and again, the one of the most surprising things about him is his knack for just really tight melodies, which is just all over this album. It could get a little bit like more languorous and long-winded on something like Blonde on Blonde, and that works for that album, but subsequently this approach works here. However, the other Dylan record I listened to this week is a little bit more interesting, that being Oh Mercy, which is notable for being one of the two albums that, or at least I think one of the two, that is produced by Daniel Lanois. The other one being Time Out of Mind. And Time Out of Mind is like one of those big ones I'm trying to build my way up to, because that's sort of seen as like one of his definitive comeback records. But Oh Mercy is like fucking almost 10 years before that. Like is like one of his last records of the 80s. And, you know, not a particularly beloved era of Dylan, but this is generally seen as a pretty big bright spot. Like, this is an album that people tend to really like. And you can really see the difference in Dylan by this point, just because this is a completely different kind of record than the ones he was making in the 60s and in the 70s. Because, I mean, as the Daniel Lanois production kind of suggests, this album sounds fucking amazing. Like, there were several times where it was just like, I was reminded, I mean, not just because of the Dylan-esque vocals, but I was like, wow, this is kind of like the War on Drugs before the War on Drugs were a thing. Just because it has that really spacious, really lush recording where all of the instruments just sound as crisp and beautiful and as big.
And it has a guy that sings like this.
I also just want to mention that it's funny you make that War on Drugs comparison, because back when the War on Drugs were first getting big in like 2014 when Lost in the Dream came out, I remember that one of the things that people were saying, or one of the things that people were comparing them to then, was Bob Dylan, specifically the Dylan records that Lanois produced. Like, that was the comparison point.
Oh, yeah.
And then they kind of just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and that comparison kind of fell back a little bit. But it's funny that you bring that up as a like organic comparison you thought of, because that was one of the reasons I got into that band in the first place, was that people were saying like Adam Granduciel was like, you know, heartland rock Dylan, essentially, in more ways than one. So
I mean, this has more in common with Springsteen than it does classic Bob Dylan. And getting adjusted to that is really weird, just because everything about this is different in approach. Like, it is still definitely a Bob Dylan album, but like the songs are way shorter, way punchier. Like, this is a, you know, it's a heartland, like classic rock album. Like the folk elements are just kind of gone. And this is an album with like writing that's also just a little bit like more tighter and hook driven. It's not as like, you know, prosaic as his earlier stuff. And it's also, you know, significantly shorter. It's a fucking barely 38 minutes. And so naturally I was like, oh, I'll get to this, just because, you know, Daniel Lanois, obviously, later era Dylan, want to see what this is like. And I was just kind of taken off guard by all the different things about it. And I was like, yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's like, it's all heat, all killer, no filler songs. But I was like, some of the songs are definitely better than others. It struck me as an album that's a little bit backloaded. And to a degree, that is the case. And then the thing is that I was like, yeah, this is probably the Dylan album I've listened to that's probably like the least like great so far. And then I just kind of kept listening to this album like every day, because it was easy and it sounded great, and I just kept coming back to these songs. And I discovered a couple of things. Number one, this has what is, I would say, pretty far and away is my favorite Bob Dylan song. And if I find one I like more, then I mean, Jesus. And it comes in an incredible 1-2 punch. But my favorite Bob Dylan song that I've heard thus far, which again, I've only heard certain members of this discography, but still, they are nonetheless full of great songs. But I have to say, most of the time is, oh my God, this song reduces me. I am but a small tiny man beneath Bob Dylan's boot when I hear this shit. It is one of the songs on here that it sort of goes between those more classic sort of heartland rocky, simpler songs, and then these really kind of stripped back, introspective, but still lush and beautiful ballads. And this song is just like a turning point for the album, where it becomes just nothing but like masterful song after masterful song. And then after that, there's What Good Am I, which I think is almost as good of a song as this. But it just like this 1-2 punch, I was just like, God, this makes me feel like Blood on the Tracks levels of melancholy. These songs are really like, they're very introspective. They're very like, you can tell that Bob, as he's gone on, like, you know, the years have kind of taken their toll on him. And it's weird that this manifests in his Heartland Rock album produced by Daniel Lanois. But you can really tell that the contrast of the simple songs and the more from the heart songs on here are kind of a result of Bob just being like, you kind of get a feeling of resignation, of like giving up. Like he's singing, like the first song on this album is called Political World. And it's like, it's almost like a parody of Bob Dylan songs, like Highway 61 Revisited songs, where it's like him, but like all of the Dylan-esque elements of his lyricism are completely stripped away, and he's just like, it's a very like, it's kind of a very like simple to the point of like, you know, being a bit too thin. But I mean, like it goes also, but then you just kind of realize it's like the reason why it's like this is because he just doesn't know how to feel about anything anymore. And so it makes this contrast of these two different types of songs feel really all the more potent. And the more I listened to this album, the more that this element just sort of felt further emphasized, and the more deeply felt that this became with me. And it was just sort of like, it's a weird contradiction of a record that I can't promise will hit home with everybody, but it went from being the album that I was like, yeah, this is probably like the least great, if still great, to I think this might be my favorite next to Blood on the Tracks. Like it's close, honestly. I think I might prefer it to the other ones. And it's because it's very different. But nonetheless, it's a new facet of a weird, contradictory, multifaceted artist like Dylan, and it feels like the first time I've kind of been able to see the vision with him as an artist, because like I've been going through all these classic records, right, and I've been seeing why people love him, but this is the first album I've listened to from him that convinced me he was going to be a favorite artist of mine. This is the first one where it's like clicked with me, where it went beyond just like an immediate appreciation and love, just being like, wow, this like resonates with me, I like get this. So I highly recommend that record. Can't promise that it'll do for you what it did for me, but man, that back half will it'll at least do something for you. It's really terrific. One thing I've also been listening to a lot of is stoner metal for some reason. Like, I don't know, fucking I just got the hankering for it and started listening to shit like Sleep and High on Fire and all that stuff. And it was sort of kicked off by the fact that I listened to a new album from maybe like the biggest stoner metal band, which is Electric Wizard. I listened to their seminal album, Dope Throne, a while ago. And it was like, that's a really good album, but it's also just kind of like, it's not really my flavor of stoner metal. It's like, it's a little bit like vibier. It's like, again, an album that's really actually meant for imbibing. So maybe that's a little bit less my thing, but I went to another one of their beloved records, which is Come My Fanatics. And it's hard. It's hard as fuck. It's really like, it is very like psychedelic and very like languorous, but it also it hits hard. Like it feels like it's a little bit closer to doom metal than it is stoner metal, and that balance just really hits home for me a little bit more. And thus I was like, oh shit, I need to listen to more of this band now, just now that I know that they're a little bit more multifaceted than perhaps I originally suspected. And I also listened to one of their more like down the line records, which is Witch Cult Today, at the recommendation of our pal Pokey Gem. And that album is also just fucking sensational. It's kind of strange to hear a band like, it's a great album, but like it's like a decade after those other albums, and it sounds just as like weathered and like not like lo-fi, but it's just like it's obviously just a very crunchy, like lower end on the quality scale production wise. They're one of those bands that just kind of make that work, that even though they don't really like grow as artists, they just consistently deliver great shit. And I probably like Witch Cult today a little bit more than Dope Throne, but still all three of those albums are very, very good, and I recommend all of them, especially Come My Fanatics. That one's a particular highlight of the year for me so far. I finished the proper studio discography of Boards of Canada. Finally, I don't know why it took me so long, but I finally listened to Tomorrow's Harvest, the final record from the band. And this album's really interesting because it has this like kind of dystopian post-nuclear apocalypse concept behind it, which feels very Boards of Canada. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, these are the guys that made GeoGaddy, all right. And as a result, this album is a bit more ambient and I would say down tempo than it is the other albums. Like just straight up, it is a bit more of it's like a moodier listen. Like the IDM elements that are in Music as the Right to Children and GeoGaddy are just like basically not here. An album that relies way more on melody than it does rhythm, and if the rhythm is there, it's very slow. And as a result, I really enjoyed it. It's definitely the album of theirs that I enjoy the least, but I think that has just more to do with what I find compelling about the band and rather like a shortcoming of the album itself. I just have to be in kind of a specific mood to listen to something like this. And when you're a band that has something like GeoGaddy, I just kind of feel like that's so all-encompassing and holistic that it's hard not to just go and get whatever I want from an album like that, or Music as the Right to Children. But it is interesting that they went on to do something so different with Campfire Head Phase and with this album too, in that they're all good, but they're all very much, they all have their distinct identities, and they're all definitely worth exploring too if you haven't. Especially Campfire Head Phase. That one's one that I find to be like supremely overlooked and under discussed.
Morgan, anything you want to share that you've been listening to?
I've been listening to Coldplay.
It's been a long depression.
I hate that I've done this because I've been making fun of Coldplay for so long that
yes,
the fact that A Rush of Blood to the Head is like fucking great is deeply annoying now. I listened to that album all the way through for the first time. Well, first of all, it just sounds amazing. Like, Lord, does it sound good. There's a guitar drone sound thing that happens during Warning Sign that is like cocaine. You know, the singles from that album have always been great. This is a known thing. Yeah, the only miss on there really is a direct result of Gwyneth Paltrow, so that tracks.
Yeah, God, that song
thanks,
sucks.
Goop Lady.
Yeah. Green Eyes, worse than Goop.
It's like it's sandwiched between two great deep cuts as well, like Daylight as well as a song that I really love.
Oh, that's
no one
deeply
ever talks
annoying.
about. And then you just have fucking Green Eyes there. I'll tell you what though, I also listened to Rush of Blood to the Head this week for the probably like something close to the dozenth time in my life. And yeah, that album is great. I also decided that my definitive take is that the best Coldplay song is Clocks, and no one can change my mind. Not that there aren't so many great contenders on this album, but like Clocks to me was like, I was listening to it, and it was like, I heard the song a million times, and it was like, this is like one of the greatest songs ever written by anyone. Like, this song is just amazing. Like, every element of that song is like, it's a miracle it hadn't already been made by U2 or some other band. Like,
I mean, it sounds 100% channeled from the ether. Coldplay did not write this song. Shut up. No, you didn't.
Yeah, and then you get the fucking Scientist next, which is like, just fuck you, Chris Martin. Just stop it. How dare you make me feel like a little kid just no.
This particular realization that I came to listening to that album is that I am old. It's somewhat inspired by Jake going on about melancholy on the last episode of the show. I have the CD of Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness in my car, and have since I started driving. So on the drive back from home after this past Labor Day weekend, I just put it in. It's about a 2 hour, 20 to 30 minute drive. So I just listened to the whole thing. And why? How is there no misses? How many songs are there? Like 36?
There are 28
38?
songs.
28. I can do math.
Count all the like B-sides that are on that like anniversary edition. There might as well be fucking 50.
Yeah.
I love how heavy the CD is. It's just really satisfying.
You can really do some damage with it, you know?
Yeah.
I got the thick boy.
Contains
what you
language
want.
that may offend.
Yeah, the lyrics to Zero. That song is so fucking good. And
yeah, it's so good.
Billy Corgan has always needed to just shut the fuck up.
It's really uncomfortable. I find it really uncomfortable. Find it really uncomfortable how fuckable they all are here.
Damn it. Damn, especially James. What the fuck is happening with his hair?
Yeah, he's always been secretly
a babe.
Yeah.
Everything went wrong for that band when Billy lost his hair.
He took the advice from Pavement very literally. It's the stupidest thing I've said in a while.
No, I'm just getting my timelines.
I understand that reference.
I just want to read some of my favorite lyrics on this album from the eternal banger XYU. Every lyric in this song is just fucking funny as hell. Rat tat tat kaboom boom. Now take that and just a bit of this, because I'm a watcher and I'm a doer of none. Come to save you because you're all mine. I hurt where I can't feel. I feel where I can't hurt. I know where I can't know. I bleed for me and mine. Kaboom, a rat tat tat and some good old bliss, because I'm a sister and I'm a motherfuck. I am made of shamrocks. I am made of stern stuff. I am never enough. I am the forgotten child. I said I want to fill you up. I want to break you. I want to give you up from one another. No one should ever come in between us and our love. Mary had a little lamb. Her face was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, I was sure to go. Now, Mary's got a problem, and Mary's not a stupid girl. Mary's got some deep shit, and Mary does not forget. This is how Mary's garden grows. And this is how Mary has her ghost. In the eyes of the jackal, I say, kaboom!
What in God's holy name are you blathering about?
That song is everything.
This is a 10 out of 10 album.
I love how I can hear him in my head saying, and I'm a motherfuck!
Rat-tat-tat. Kaboom!
That's exactly how he says it.
And yet, when you're listening to it, you're like,
yeah,
it's like, hell yeah, dude, live your truth.
It's even funnier when you realize the title is like an alternate way of writing XYU, as in like ex-girlfriend. It's just so fucking like juvenile, and I
hate him. I really hate him.
Look, the signs were there since the beginning. We can't say that
it is partially
unprecedented.
It's partially down to the fact that I hate him, and also for 8 years he was certifiably a genius. Like,
yeah.
Fuck you, dude. Bald
I mean, there were so few people who were making albums and just music in general as consistently great as Billy Corgan in the 90s. It's like him he's on the same level that like Nick Cave and Tom Waits are in the 90s in terms of how like they just shat masterpieces constantly.
Yeah, oh Christ. Y'all thought we were done with Muse.
Oh hell yeah.
Look, the album, it's funny that I mentioned Smashing Pumpkins directly before this. This album, Will of the People, is not seer levels of bad. I will not claim that it is.
No.
It inspired a similar feeling in me that Seer did. It just feels so low effort, so lowest common denominator for this band that it's like, wrap it up. You are so old. Stop this. It's embarrassing. Compliance is maybe my favorite thing here because it is the only thing that made me laugh. Which
really,
we just need your compliance. Shut up.
You weren't giggling a little bit during "You Make Me Feel Like It's Halloween"?
Oh, Morgan? No.
No.
Morgan was not laughing during that song.
No, that Muse on this album is like your fucking dad or something. Like whenever he's trying to make you laugh, it is about as funny as prostate cancer. When he's not trying to make you laugh, it's the funniest shit I've ever heard in my life.
You know what? Fair enough. I still think that the run of songs from Kill or Be Killed, Verona, Euphoria are like 3 of my favorite Muse songs in a while. But I have come to accept the fact that everyone I know
goes away in the end.
Yep. Fine. It's fine. I've made my peace with it.
I remember sometime when I don't remember what I was talking about, but I said something and Ryley was like, it's bad when Morgan is on his contemplative shit. Well, Muse's Will of the People had me on my contemplative shit. I started thinking about death, mortality, how small a time frame we really have in the grand scheme of things, and I'm sitting here wasting 38 minutes of it listening to the fucking leftovers of the bad Muse album from 10 years ago. I need to get my life in order.
All right, let's move into our first review of the day, which is the new album from the Callous Daoboys, Celebrity Therapist. Now, the Callous Daoboys are a Georgia-based mathcore mayhem band.
Georgia.
I describe what they do as mayhem, to be honest, more so than any kind of particular genre. I mean,
that's actually a black metal band.
In a certain sense, they are very much living into the tradition of mathcore, which is being goofy and silly as fuck, and almost kind of like superseding the whole focus on, technical musicality to just kind of use that skill to basically beat the listener over the head with as much different shit as possible. Truly a record that carries on in the tradition of records like Calculating Infinity, for instance. Some of those really wacko, whacked out, extremely
more Miss Machine, probably.
Yeah, for sure. It has some of that additional kind of goofiness that Greg Puciato eventually brought to the band. And of course, more than a sprinkle of the Mike Patton energy that they often channeled as well when he wasn't directly in their band. But yeah, anyway, Dillinger feels like an obvious reference point just because they're such a seminal podcore band, and they were the first thing that came to mind when I heard this last week. But the Callous Daoboys truly are so much more. They are the meeting point of Dillinger Escape Plan and like Black Country New Road, for instance. They have more in common with Black Midi than Botch in terms of, I don't know, mathcore related music. Like they are just so in their own lane. What they're doing is very much, I would say, you know, it feels very much of a piece with a lot of the, you know, current wave of extremely Zoomer friendly, weirdo, wacko, extreme rock metal bands where every member is somehow like a fucking prodigious genius on their instrument, and they all look like, you know, hipsters and twinks and shit, and it's just like, what is,
all of them are weirdly hot.
yeah,
like it's not even fair.
yeah. I mean, the front man's name is Carson Pace, and they've got a violinist, of course. You know, it's just,
when I found out his name was Carson Pace, I was just like, could this band have a front man who is named anything else other than Carson?
yeah,
I don't think they could.
They're just a bunch of young kids making as much noise as they possibly can. And their particular brand of doing that is to channel a lot of the specific metallic influences that I feel like are very familiar to and dear to the three of us, you know, which is something that kind of distinguishes them a little bit from a band like Black Midi, for instance, which are drawing on a little bit more of an eclectic range of influences. There's also a helping of emo in this as well, or like not pop punk necessarily, but kind of like that 2000s post-hardcore emo that I associate with bands like Brand New, for instance, that comes through on here a lot. There's a little bit of alt metal too. It's a super difficult record to describe, so I'll cede the floor at this point. Jake, I know that you are probably the biggest booster of this record of the three of us. What was the experience like for you of discovering this, and how would you kind of describe what this is?
While I definitely would say that they are their own beast, I think the most difficult challenge in my way for talking about this album was trying to describe them without bringing up the Dillinger Escape Plan. Because, I mean, like, yeah, they're definitely their own thing, but also, like, this band really likes that band. And the Black Midi comparisons I get to some extent, though all of the like rate your music comparisons to it I've seen are like really fucking snooty ass people being like, oh, this music is what Black Midi fans think the new Black Midi is. And it's like,
I saw that one too.
Right? Like, dude, shut up. I like both of these. I like both of these albums like about the same, and they suit. That's the thing, is that you can compare it to Black Midi, but these albums suit totally different purposes. And that I think that the primary thing here is that like Black Midi simply does not have the hardcore influence that this band has, which is inextricably linked to, like, if there's one overriding genre element that takes place in most elements of these songs, that's it. And like Ryley said, this is difficult to describe because these songs do not abide by structure. They have no rules. They simply obey the whims of wherever the sonic ideas want to go. Sometimes there will be a fucking hardcore beatdown that'll be, you know, harder than anything this side of Converge. Sometimes everything will be stripped back and there will be like dreamier backing vocals and strings, and it'll sound like really like moody and contemplative. There are occasional moments on this album that they go full on, like there'll be like a little ambient section of a song and then it'll just absolutely burst apart. And that's where like the mathcore comes in, because like these riffs are big, they're devastating, they hit like a motherfucker. Every single song here certainly has, like, just because they don't have structure doesn't mean they don't at least abide by some unifying themes or ideas, be it in like an overarching sense or maybe a lyrical one. I think the coolest thing about this album for me is, number one, is that just I think I'm just so cracked at this point, like mentally, that the only way you can make an impression on me that's like this significant is just by throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just doing something this bat shittery laden. Just because this is an album that is maximalist as hell. And it's also written to be very maximalist, which is certainly something that I can see being challenging for some people. Whereas the more I paid attention to the writing of this record, the more I really, really got on with it. And that's difficult to describe also just because this is written immensely obliquely. I mean, like every single line in the same song, like they don't go together. Like this is fucking insane.
I don't say this inherently negatively, but I think this is by far the album with the most pretentious lyricism of anything that has come out this year. Like sitting down to read this lyric sheet is like, there's like every other line I'm like, what?
You have to like, and because the music is also as big and fast moving, this is an album that you literally have to like listen to maybe a half a dozen times to even grasp half of what it's about. And I'll admit that'll definitely have its mileage to some people, and it is somewhat limiting with me. I will give them that. But it leads to this album succeeding more than it fails with me, which is to say it succeeds most of the time and fails almost none of the time. I think what is really evocative about these lyrics is that they are undeniably pretentious, like to a fault occasionally, but they're also incredibly evocative. Like passage by passage is that they still instill a specific feeling in you, and that works for whatever song they're given. They're intensely topical, and you might like that might go over your head a little bit. There are moments like on one of the earlier songs here, they talk about like, you know, talking about people with like the Punisher stickers and the fucking
you're not John Wick, you LARPing fuck.
Which I won't lie, that is an absolute benefit to me, just because this voices it drapes the problems that they're talking about in a very similar way to the last year's Illusory Walls. Obviously, that is a little bit more easy to digest and understandable. It's very directly metaphorical, whereas this is like just again, it's a puzzle. You have to directly interrogate this, and even then, you might not even get something out of it. But once I got what they were going for, I really felt it deep in my soul, and that is to say, I have not heard an album in the last 3 years that has perfectly embodied what it is like to be alive right now in this decade. And that sounds kind of pretentious, but it's like nothing makes sense. Everything is all over the goddamn place. It's loud as fuck. It never stops. And there's like 40 different people. There's like 80 different instruments. And it's just like, it's an onslaught. And it feels perfectly evocative of the raw chaos and distress. And there's lots of moments here where it backs away from like the directly angry lyricism, where it goes about like your bank account doesn't care if your friend dies. There's one lyric on here where I'm like, oh man, that fucking hurts, dude. And there's also just songs on here that I think are like legitimately like really harrowing and emotional. Like my favorite song on here, which is Field Sobriety Practice, which I mean the lyrics about looking into a mirror on this song, they hurt a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. The whole song here is filled with this sort of start-stop engine revving guitar shit that is just really satisfying. This is like the best mathcore song since anything that the Dillinger Escape Plan made, frankly. And title track before that also does a similar thing that I think is comparable. I just get a little bit more emotionally out of it. Same thing with the Elephant Man in the Room. I also just love how there are lots of abrasive, noisy, rhythmic sections here, but when the band do go after more melodic ideas, like on Beautiful Dude Missile, impeccable name, it all comes together in a really satisfying way that gives you a couple of moments to breathe, as it were, so that you can kind of latch on to a more traditionally pretty instrumental idea. So it's like, it is cacophonous and tosses you around, but I feel like it's very elegant in how chaotic it is. And it's also just a very tightly designed experience. It's a very short record for what it is, and I feel like all of its songs are paced very well. That said, all of the single elements of this sound, there's just no way of knowing if they're going to work for you until you listen to it. And there's also no way of knowing if they're all going to work together for you without listening to it. So it makes this nearly impossible to recommend, but I recommend it nonetheless, just because there is a chance you will just be like, no, this scratches an itch.
I'll tell you what, about the third time I think I listened to this week, I threw back a 500 ml can of Monster Energy drink, and I put this on.
Hell yes.
And it was like someone was speaking clearly to me. Like I feel like I understood everything for 40 minutes.
Dude, I threw this on my car stereo on my way to work right after chugging a fucking triple shot of espresso so I could get ready for my shift. And I was driving down the highway and I was just like,
yes, like
that was
listening to this album, lyrics like, as I wash your body, I will fill hell with you, with your every whim and any consequence, with your bones attached to my collared shirt, impulse items of conquest dives dripping with the matricide of comparable bungee cord static. I'm like, I'm always saying this. That's how I felt when I had thrown back that Monster Energy drink and I was listening to this and just completely bugging the fuck out. There's moments on this record where I literally do not know whether to laugh or cry. It is being completely driven to those two polar extremes at the same time. My sourness, my bitter red, my constant need to feel like I'd be better off dead. All of this pushes you down in your seat, the Skyrider pattern that you let repeat. One of my favorite random lines in this song, which is the second song, by the way, spread across the floor, you fucked up the floor. That shit just made me laugh.
They're not even presented in a way that's like the musical ideas keep changing like word by word, so that the presentation of these lyrics is super dynamic until you get a moment like the lyrics to Field Sobriety Practice. I have to go back to this song. This song like haunts me. This song starts with, I sit banking karma on the other line. This flashing cry is sinking in the room, and I'll fry myself at the stake if it means you call me home, if it means I get control. Please remove the wire from my neck, belittle keys that you can't spend. I think it's time that we grow legs and walk into the ocean. Now it's an empty promise of killing time that we don't have, quiet desperation. Could it be I deserve? But when I look in the mirror, I don't see anyone who cares. For the longest time I loved to call it quits on what prevents the quiet pill delete. Like, dude, give me a minute.
It's
Jesus
legitimately
Christ.
It's heavy fucking shit. It is a suicide anthem, like fed through an AI and then kind of spat back out at you. It's really difficult to even fully comprehend it. And the first couple of times I listened to this before the infamous Monster Energy drink experience, I had no idea how I felt about it. Like, I still kind of don't. And I still think that I'm not sure how well it sort of congeals together as a holistic record. But then again, the more I think about it like that, the more I start to feel like I'm not even approaching it in the right way to do that. Like,
the appeal is that it kind of doesn't.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous miasma of fucking insanity. And to treat it or to try and approach it with logic, it feels like you are kind of like you've already lost to a certain extent, and I can understand
this
that
is music to be heard, not listened to, if you catch my drift. You feel this shit in your bones.
I mean, Morgan, you're a mathcore dude. You were
The
singing the
Dillinger
praises.
boy.
Yeah, and you were singing the praises of Botch the other week as well. And this is stuff is in your blood. How do you reconcile that history that the stuff is rooted in with the total fucking 2022-ness of it all? Like, how does this hit you?
I enjoyed the album a fair bit, but it is a little, zillennial.
Yeah, definitely.
That combined with the fact that this is obviously a band that is still, as ever, with so many new acts that we review that are only 1 or 2 albums deep, still learning how to fuck. Yeah, but between that and that, there are some limitations on how much I enjoy this. Instrumentally, everyone here is on point. I mean, if a mathcore band is going to be worth their salt, they are going to be damn good at what they do. There are times, especially when it comes to the vocal presence on here, where this fella is just so Mike Patton-y, Greg Puciato-y.
He sounds exactly like Greg Puciato. There's no other way to put it.
That it's almost distracting.
A little bit.
And I'm just like, I do, this is cool and all, but I'm gonna go listen to Miss Machine.
I say this as some person who likes the album most here. I absolutely listened to One of Us is the Killer twice this week after listening to this.
There are obviously worse things that you could be held up next to and be like, this is a little too much like this. If somebody said that my music was a little too much like the Dillinger Escape Plan, I'd probably retire. As for the parts of it that are a little more unique and particular to this band, I'm interested in seeing those being fleshed out more and gelling more with the really mathy hardcore tinge stuff on here, because it doesn't always come together as a cohesive unit, I don't think. But there's not really any point on here where I'm like, nah, no skips.
It's difficult to reconcile the experience of this album with basically anything that you consider what you appreciate about music and like what constitutes good music. Like, I don't even know where to begin talking about the shit that this record has made me think and feel this week. There's so much. One thing I think that the biggest thing this record has in its favor, apart from all of the instrumental prowess, is that it has an absolutely fantastic sense of humor about itself. And
yes,
while it is, exceedingly pretentious, it's like that is the strength of it in a certain sense, and that it's a record that laughs at itself and laughs at the world, and kind of is just fully puts its entire pussy into committing to the excess. There's
on title track, there are moments where they poke fun at the fact that this is a title track, and they the meanings of their songs. Like, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, don't want any Callous Daoboys. I want my murder podcast. Like,
I love that
lyric. that I can't explain that, but it makes sense to me. Like when he says that, I'm like, bro, I feel that. I know what you mean, right? It's not until you are dying of heat stroke that you will admit that the earth is round.
Oh, God.
Little lines like that. Don't force feed my family on your own time. What? It's like a collision of different fragments of things that it's like 500 different television channels that are being overlapped and played at the same time, and then you're kind of feeding your microphone up to it and getting your phone to try and transcribe that signal.
This album is the best possible musical version of an album sounding like a Twitter feed. Like, normally we would use that as a derogatory term. Here, I mean it as being like, this is the best that this idea could possibly be.
One of my favorite little sequences. The thing about the lyricism on this album is that it goes from one idea to the next and it never really lingers on a particular image for very long, more than a couple of lines.
No.
There are occasions when that are exceptions to that. And one of my favorite ones is in the second song where he goes on, he has this little monologue, and I'll just read it. Everyone remembers their first experience with deja vu. For her, it was her first grade art teacher saying, "These shouldn't look like octopuses," to the class while they were painting trees. "You said that in my dream," she exclaimed. Believing her experience to be nothing but a subconscious escapade, she then realized her response was also part of the dream. 30 years later, she felt this way 800 times over, like she had been here before, repeating the same actions day in and day out. Shatter everything, sever all your ties, give the sand a new home inside your cavities. Obey the homily, jerk off in your car, kick up pollen while you drive back to the living quarters.
There is something that is like, that's utterly demented, but I also like, I get it. Like, there's something there about how people are like constantly desensitized and lingering on the past, and how there's like the violent extremities that you go to break away from it, and it feels like the music is embodying that. It's like this is music that is made purely designed to get people to pay attention to it. It's the first time where I've heard a mathcore album since the Dillinger Escape Plan where I'm like, this is like the next phase of this genre. Like it's not fully realized, it's not perfect, but this is the first time where it feels like someone has taken the blueprint of it and done something that's progressive and interesting with it. In that respect, I would say that like the most similar trajectory they have to Black Midi isn't sound wise, it's with their album trajectory, because it seems like their last record is sort of like their Schlagenheim. This seems to be kind of like their second record. And then what I'm hoping comes after this would be their equivalent of Hellfire, where everything's a little bit more maybe fine-tuned and focused, but they also do what they always done, but like better. So like, I'm just really excited that music like this even exists at all.
During that fateful, Monster Energy drink listen, I think the moment where the record like fully hit and connected with me and then kind of had me in its grasp was at the end of Beautiful Dude Missile, where the song is just going nuts and he's just kind of shouting "There is no answer" over and over and over again. And that felt like the heart of the record in a certain sense. That felt like the truest and simplest sentiment on the whole thing. There is no answer. There's no way of rationalizing or explaining anything. Like, it is what feels like chaos is chaos. And that the realization there's no way to like make it all make sense is what drives you to the place where your brain feels like what this album is like to listen to.
That part is pure Greg Puciato. There's no answer, there's no answer. And also, my favorite lyric on the entire record is because if death was part of God's plan, he was absolutely making it up on the fly. Like, that's also the heart of this record too.
That should be on Carson's tombstone when he dies. That's a tombstone.
It'll be on mine, Mr. Pace.
I think that's basically a good place to wrap it up for the Callous Daoboys. Let's do our favorite tracks and ratings for Celebrity Therapist. Jake, why don't you go first?
My three favorite tracks is the 3-track run of Beautiful Dude Missile, title track, and Field Sobriety Practice. And least favorite track, it's probably Violent Astrology, just because that's the song that I think suffers the most from not having to build off of a song that comes before it. It feels like the fact that there is nothing that comes before it makes it more jarring in a way, just because this album is like a feeling of constant perpetual motion that you just need to have like momentum to get into. So it feels like when it starts, it just kind of takes a bit to shift into gear, as it were, but still a good song. And I give this an 8 out of 10.
Alrighty. August has listened to the record. He gives it a 6. Morgan, your turn.
Three favorites: title track, Violent Astrology, Field Sobriety Practice. Least favorite, probably What Is Delicious? Who Swarms? I feel like it has to be said like this because
I don't know.
What the fuck are you talking about? I know less than I did before. and I will give this a 7 out of 10.
All right.
Whoa.
My three favorite tracks are going to be title track for starters, which I also want to shout out. I love the moment where this goes from being the most insane metalcore you've ever heard to a deep cut on brand new science fiction.
Yeah.
Like there's a point where suddenly it just sounds like I'm listening to fucking 451 or something. Like
Yep.
it just changes.
Yep. I know
into
the
that
moment you're talking about.
immediately. So that's an amazing song. Field Sobriety Practice, I'll throw in as well. And Star Baby, I think, is a fantastic closer. Really ends the record in a really nice, memorable place. Least favorite track, probably The Elephant Man in the Room. And I will give this a strong 7 out of 10 as well. A record that I want to say it's growing on me because I still feel like that's not the right way of thinking about it, but it is a record that I'm starting to appreciate and overall understand, I suppose, more and more the more time I spend with it.
Our listeners just need to understand that scores for this album are simply a pointless endeavor.
There's every possibility.
It's silly.
There's every possibility that this may be one of my favorite records of the year by the time the year is over. Who knows?
Not ruling it out, frankly.
Yeah, and that gives us an average overall of 7.0 for the Callous Daoboys Celebrity Therapist. All right, let's get into our second review of the day, which is, of course, Megadeth, the sick, the dying, and the dead. This is the 16th Megadeth album, the follow-up to 2016's Dystopia, so the first Megadeth record in 6 years, as well as, I mean, who knows how many wild changes the Megadeth lineup have been through at this point. I mean, one of the single least consistent lineups in all of the classic era of metal. Like it's Dave Mustaine and whoever the fuck.
It is more than any other metal band in recent memory. Megadeth is simply the product of one man, and it always has been, just because of the nature of Megadeth and, Dave Mustaine, the fail son of metal. This is also an album that comes in a precarious place because, the last time we got a Megadeth album was 2016's Dystopia, which, from the title alone and the year it was released, you can guess a lot of the topics that were on Dystopia, even though that album was seen as a bit of a comeback after the absolute disaster that was 2013 Super Collider. But now in 2022, we are in a place where we're in the post-pandemic era of album releases, and naturally, because Dave Mustaine has always had some thoughts on the politics, that's going to play a factor, as well as the fact that he recently won a battle with throat cancer, which, good for him, all more power to him. But
the least genuine. It was the most yeah, good for him, I suppose. Well done on not dying.
Look, it is difficult for me to compliment the man because obviously we don't see eye to eye on a whole lot of things, and he's not making
he
music
doesn't
interesting
inspire
enough for me
basic humanity.
Sure, that's fine, but the thing is that I feel like Megadeth has, from its inception, always been a band that is tried to have almost a political bent, because that was what they were starting to do in Metallica right when Dave got kicked out of the band. So he was kind of carried that over a little bit, and then just sort of made that his entire identity. I mean, even in those golden run of records, I mean, the second Megadeth album is called Peace Sells Who's Buying, for fuck's sake. And that's just kind of been the case. And even though the records have varied in quality, there have been lots of overriding themes. I think that the sort of run of maybe Risk to Super Collider is just sort of where nobody has cared about this band at all, and now we're sort of back into a place where we're kind of hey, we're not at the low points of this discography or anything, so it's good, right? And I guess we're gonna switch polarities here, because I'm definitely gonna be the most negative about this album here. I think this album is bad. And here's the thing, is that I think it's funny we cover this after Muse, because this is that's the libertarian left, and now we're covering the libertarian right. So, we're filling out the entire political compass on the Jams and T spectrum here, but also it serves as a complete counterpoint to the approach that somebody like Matt Bellamy takes on an album like that, where it's just, he doesn't have one, really. It's just kind of vague. And whereas here, it's almost focused to a fault, where it's like, it's long, it's ambitious, all the songs are about topical things, and, all this stuff. And sure, to some degree, I do respect the effort that's here. And hell, I respect the effort behind the most important thing in Megadeth, which is the guitar playing. A lot of the riffs on this album, pretty sick. Even deep into the album, when this goes on way past the point at which it should, the riffs still pretty solid. It's hard to fault modern metal production and Dave Mustaine's playing. So, whatever. That's going to be an unassailable good point on pretty much anything, and unless he leads into his like dad rock sensibilities like on Super Collider. But thankfully that doesn't happen too much on this album. Instead, it's pretty straight up heavy metal like Dystopia was. It's a little less racist than that album. It's also just like, my biggest problem with this album here is the writing, and I don't mean he's like poorly tackling subjects. I don't care about the nuance with which these subjects are talked about. I don't care about it on Rust in Peace, and I don't care about it here. What I care about is the hooks. And the hooks and the melodies on this album are a weasel, they're a wazzle, they are whatever they are entirely antithetical to what he was doing at the beginning of his career. Everything here is so awkwardly written. Everything here, like every verse has like 5 too many syllables to be like remotely like comprehensible in terms of like basic melodic structure. And it's so rambly and incoherent the whole way through that it just blends together. And Mustaine's delivery, where he's like the whole time, doesn't help that. So it's just kind of like badass guitar solo, and then he's just like Asian virus, and then it's like,
look, it's I want to take a step back. I started this off mocking the mini lineup changes of Megadeth and the fact that it is always going to be the Dave Mustaine band, which is true, but it is worth
Steve DiGiorgio also.
Yeah, I was getting to that. Yeah, so it is worth it mentioning that there's an entirely new rhythm section on this album than from any previous Megadeth album. You have bassist Steve DiGiorgio, metal legend, of course. He played on Death's Human and Individual Thought Patterns, and a number of other great bands as well. Plus you have, sadly we had the loss of Lamb of God drummer Chris Adler, but we do have the addition of Dirk Verburen, who is himself a really, really talented and incredibly experienced drummer from across all swaths of extreme metal. A really, really, really talented guy. And in general, I think the playing on this record is really, really good. I'll back that up as to what you were saying, Jake. I don't think that musically this is a great, and I'm just talking about musically. I don't think musically this is a great thrash record, but I do think that it is a pretty good one for the most part.
Perfectly fine.
I like the riffs. I think there are moments where especially you get a little bit more color and flavor, songs like Mission to Mars and songs like Killing Time as well, where the instrumentation sort of sticks out a little bit more and kind of feels like it is actually, and the closing track as well, This Planet's on Fire as well, where you have Sammy Hagar is on that track as well. You have a little bit more, I guess, memorability, oomph, not great songs in and of themselves, but that is hardly because the musicians aren't trying. Dave Mustaine, as is the case on basically everything Megadeth have done since the late 90s, or maybe even beyond, is probably the weakest part of his own band. And look, I hold no animosity to Dave Mustaine, partially because I'm a little bit more disconnected from the music of Megadeth than the two of you, so I don't have like the good music as much for me to get angry.
I pity him more than I dislike him, frankly, but.
And he is like ultimately a pitiable figure. He's easy enough. Like if you forget about the music and sort of focus in on who he is, the kind of beliefs that he has, and also just the way he's behaved over this last several decades, it is easy to understand why he isn't very well liked. I think maybe to some extent he might be a little bit overhated as well, but also you can understand why his personality is kind of ingratiating to a certain extent. And all that aside, because my feelings on Dave on this record really have nothing to do with his personality or his politics. No. He is an annoying vocal presence here. He is positively ear scraping at certain points to listen to. The lyricism veers from passable and at most in songs like Dogs of Chernobyl and We'll Be Back to downright juvenile and kind of insulting in songs like Night Stalkers, Junkie, Celebutante.
God.
Junkie.
Just
Celebutante.
The way he says Celebutante in that song, like, just makes me want to put him in timeout. Like, enough.
Homie just learned the word debutante and is like, oh, think of all the potential.
Shit.
And like the one that
I'm sorry if it was probably a little more like, think of all the potential.
One of the songs I actually don't mind a little bit more, I'm a little bit more positive on, is still a song that makes me laugh when I read about, because there's extensive notes on Apple Music from Mustaine about each song. And so like hearing him describe how he came up with the idea for the song Dogs of Chernobyl, it's kind of like, it's partly it's kind of moving in a certain sense, like him being so overwhelmed with the tragedy of Chernobyl, spurned by watching the HBO miniseries, and then kind of channeling that into a story. And this is where the whole idea kind of goes astray, because he channels that into a story of being abandoned in a relationship, and essentially the whole song is like, the lyric is, you left me like the dogs of Chernobyl. He takes this really powerful image, this fact that, you know, so many people when they had to evacuate Chernobyl, like, left their pets behind, essentially, and all these kind of dogs were left to die and become radiation poisoned and all that sort of stuff. And that's a powerful and haunting image, and he's using it as a way of expressing how he feels at the betrayal of a partner. Which again it's not the, you know, I think you could, a better, more talented lyricist could maybe make that parallel work, but when it comes from Dave, it sounds so just really ill-advised.
You could also read it as him being upset about some certain friends of his abandoning him.
Oh,
what is a false equivalence?
Yeah, I mean, this is where you get to the song Soldier On, where he's like, he's probably one of the most obnoxious songs on the record lyrically. Even in the notes, he's kind of like, if you look at the lyrics, it clearly tells you who it's about. If you're part of the inner circle here, if you know what's been going on over the past 10 years, you'll be able to recognize some of the shenanigans that were taking place in the band and in our presence, and sometimes behind our backs too. Soldier On was one of those things where I knew that in order for me to continue to experience any happiness in the world, I was going to have to walk away from the relationship that I had. It was much like Tornado of Souls. If I told you Tornado of Souls is a failed relationship song, most people would say, wow, I didn't get that, but it's the truth. Like, this fucking, I don't give a shit about the end.
Dave, the reason Tornado of Souls is a good song is because it's a good song, my guy. I don't know what to tell you. This brings me to a particular sticking point here of why I think that, generally speaking, he's a lot more intolerable on an album, like later albums like this. And it's the same reason that there's some later era metal albums from bands like Metallica that make the same mistake. And it's they don't know how to mix and process their lead singer's vocals. They did it in the 80s perfectly fine. You go back and listen to those albums and they'll put some reverb on it or some effects or some processing or whatever, and it makes it all blend together. On here, his vocals are nauseating because they're right in your ear. They're completely unadorned and raw, and you're begging for them to sound like they did on the debut, where you could just barely understand them.
I also think
they need to be lower in this mix.
I also think that part of it as well is like something you can't fix with mixing, which is the fact that, especially with extreme metal or any form of metal, really, the older you get, the more your voice is going to suffer. There's a certain extent to which no metal singers that were at their peak in the 80s are going to still have it like at the same extent. You just don't. It's just not possible. It's just the way that human beings age, especially when you're using your voice like that. So Dave Mustaine, who's never had a great voice to begin with, is now reduced to this kind of strained rasp, I would describe it as. And I believe he's doing his best. And I believe to a certain extent he wants his voice to have impact. He doesn't want to have to bury it. And of course he's a massive egomaniac as well, so he would never bury his vocals. But it is an ultimate, like, there's only so good they could possibly be, no matter how you're treating them at all. Like, the real problem with reviewing any kind of late career effort is that, you know, the band may try as hard as they can, the singer may try as hard as they can, but you're always fighting an uphill battle, no matter what. And so to a certain extent, while I find Mustaine grating here, and at points I do think he is annoying, I don't even think I would say that I find him frustrating or I know I find him frustrating, but I don't think I harbor any kind of negative or even sort of like vaguely annoyed sensibility toward him in general. I'm just kind of lightly amused and sort of disaffected. My favorite thing that I've encountered in this whole album cycle is that in the notes for We'll Be Back, I just love, this is such a stupid thing to say, but it's also like so goofy that it makes me laugh, and I kind of respect it. This song is about persevering in the end. You know you can't hold me down, and no matter what, I'm not going to give up. The things you can count on in this world are death, taxes, and Dave Mustaine coming through any kind of hardship. Just the idea of Dave saying that about himself is like, it doesn't make me like the music anymore, but I admire this spirit of being that, like, bluntly just goofy. But look,
no, absolutely.
That's me anyway. I don't have much more to say. Morgan, you are, along with Jake, the Thrash boy as well. Jake had a chance to express some juicy Thrash opinions back earlier in the start of this episode. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit now about, well, first of all, because we haven't really discussed Megadeth, where do Megadeth sit in the canon for you? How do you feel Megadeth have aged, and how do you feel this record stands up or delivers in terms of a late career Megadeth album?
To be honest, I'm not really that big of a thrash guy to begin with. It's a genre that really tops out with Metallica for me, and that's mainly because there was so much other stuff going on in those records. I have a lot of respect for so many of those groups, every member of the big four, bands like Exodus and Testament. Those are fixtures in metal in general at this point, and I got a lot of respect for them. You know, it's Megadeth, man. It's just an inherent. There's nothing that isn't funny about Megadeth anymore. Even their best stuff gets like a sort of gleeful giggle out of me. Like the main riff in Holy War starts and like, yeah. And now I'm sort of
exactly.
And now I laugh because I don't know. It's almost pity at this point. And it's such an asshole thing to say. It's like, oh, you pity Dave Mustaine. And genuinely, it was very sad to hear of his throat cancer diagnosis, and I'm glad he's gotten through that. I don't think it's changed his vocal presence at all.
Yeah, so, I feel like I should clarify when I was describing his voice as a fucking rasp or whatever.
He's always sounded like this.
Yeah, exactly. I was not.
Yeah, he sounded the same on Dystopia. Like, I mean,
yeah. He's come out of it as good as he was before.
Yeah. Whatever that may mean to you.
Exactly.
I'm going to be honest, I didn't particularly care that Dystopia was a little racist. I mostly cared that it was mid. And, you know, the reason for me not caring, just like the reason for me not caring on here is that Megadeth lyrics have always been hilarious or abysmal. Like even on their absolute peak stuff. So it's not what I'm here for. So it would be a little silly of me to get particularly up in arms over them at this juncture. I feel my main issue here is it's so long.
Why?
Dude,
Why is it so long?
You could cut like 5 songs off of this easy.
Could we just have it the sick and the dying? Let's just leave the dead out of this.
Keep the dead.
Oh my god. Dude, no one has worse album name game than Megadeth. No
this is
one.
Like top half of their discography in terms of album
Oh
titles.
yeah.
I mean,
God.
one of my favorites is So Far, So Good, Ellipses.
So what?
So what? There's euthanasia spelled exactly like you want euthanasia to be spelled, like The System Has Failed. I wonder what that album's about. United Abomination.
I just want to read out these song titles on United Abominations.
Mm-hmm.
Washington is next. Never Walk Alone, ellipses, A Call to Arms.
Oh.
And my favorite one of all, Amerikistan, as in like Afghanistan, but Amerikistan.
Dude, come on. Come on now.
Oh.
These are absolutely amazing. All of these song titles to say, the song titles on this album are practically tasteful by comparison. And I mean, we haven't even talked about the Ice-T feature on Night Stalkers as well, which is like, even when you know it's coming, it's still like, oh, it's bad. Oh, this sucks.
Yeah.
Yo, when you hear 4 MH-47 and Black Hawk helicopters coming low in the dark of night, loaded with Rangers and Delta Force special ops shooters. He sounds like a fucking middle school kid who's like super into fucking like black fucking Call of Duty and shit, just describing his wet dream.
Yeah, that's the song.
Locked and loaded, game's over, bitches. Got you in my night vision, about to let this 30mm cannon go. You never seen us coming, so there's no chance of running. Like, I need August to be here to read these in his most like, you've never seen it coming, so there's no chance of running voice, because that's how it sounds. It is like the most giddy fucking childish fantasy of being a fucking, yeah, let's go, let's fucking kill some fucking brown people. It's like bullshit. It is.
I still can't get past the lyric, you barely see the pilots on this Zeroilum night. It's in quotes, Zeroilum. What are you, do you mean zero illumination? As in lack of light?
Maybe it's a fucking thing that fucking military
Dark.
people say. Who fucking knows?
Well, it just goes to be like, it's in this like line, and it just goes to show like there's so many lines on here where he like on the first song where he adds the yeah to every fucking line in the song, and it's just like, why are you making these so long? Like, they sound so awkward. Just cut off a couple syllables, man.
Some of the most fucking like, you know, teenage fucking Megadeth core lyrics in songs like Life in Hell, when he's like, I'm a disease and I'm addicted to myself.
You can't be trusted. Born to lose, you'll never win. I love the lyrics that are like that, where it's just like explanation, redundant explanation.
Like, just statement.
Take that, America.
Like, this is true, then the opposite of this is false. Like that's how he constructs.
Gosh.
That's how he constructs a lyric. We have to talk about Junkie in some detail. All right. So fucking, I mean, look,
Junkie.
Before we get into the lyrics, I just want to read Dave's explanation of the song. This song is about somebody who has character traits that lead them to live their life in excess. When you're just starting out in life and you get around the wrong people, you start having some areas of your life ruined. When I was little, my mum would say, show me your friends and I'll show you who you are. I thought, Mum, stop. But when I looked at that sage advice from my mum, there were a lot of friends I had that needed to go. Once you make some of the necessary changes you need to make, it makes life better. So I'm not sure like how to interpret that in terms of what the song is about. Is it about someone who is actually like in the throes of a crippling drug addiction, or is it about someone who is addicted to dangerous people? Essentially, is Dave casting judgment over the junkies that he once surrounded himself with? I don't know how I'm supposed to interpret this. Like,
no, he's very. I mean, like, again, I hate to keep going back to this point, but it's like it's because Dave refuses to let it die. It's like this is about Metallica. This is about when they all got drunk and trashed all the time, and because he was a fucking, and that's why he got kicked out of the band, and that's why he was so upset and he felt abandoned by them. But he was also like a pain in the ass to work with. But like at the same time, he's casting judgment on addicts because he's blaming people around him and not like the fact that you might be like predisposed to that. Like he has no sympathy for the plight of like addiction itself. He's casting it as a purely like exterior force that is inflicted onto unsuspecting people like him. Like it wasn't his fault. But all the other people, I have no sympathy for them. I have no. Dave, fucking, will you get a grip? Like, honestly, man.
Describing a drug addict as a dope-seeking missile is simultaneously the funniest and most offensive thing I think that Dave says on this album. Like, is that
come on, man?
That's a joke. You're making a joke at this point. And I think it's telling, and I get that a lot of people, this has a really low rating, so probably everyone hates the song, but the song that I find the least, like, it's just annoying is weirdly enough the one song that's not about, like, fucking disease or addiction, and that's the song that's about going to Mars. I don't want to say I like this song, but I find it significantly less fucking annoying and offensive than a lot of the other songs on this record.
Be every song on this album. Like I agree with you. I don't even necessarily think I like this song, but if you're gonna ask me, hey, what's the 5 minutes of this album that you're gonna want to sit through the most? It's probably this, because it is.
There's
so stupid.
There's a spoken word bridge on this song where it's like mission control, and he's like you're talking about like some foreign, like Mars, I guess, or some foreign planet where he's investigating. It's like, Roger, I see debris and rubbish everywhere that's covered in dust. And then the commander's like, why don't we just return to Earth and let it rust in peace out here? And just literally,
I headbang on the gangway, say my prayers, cross my heart and hope to die, open a window for the 7 sisters of Pleiades. Hello, ladies. 7 sisters. Hello, Moon Man. This is just Dave Mustaine talking about how he wants to be an astronaut. I can't hate this. It's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, and the fucking description about it is all about how like he used to hate he used to think the idea of space travel was a big fucking waste of time and a waste of money, and then he watched a bunch of TED Talks and like spoke to someone who's an astronaut's wife and had a conversation with her, and that completely turned him around, and now he thinks the space race is the most exciting thing that America is doing right now. Just the most fucking stupid, like, never in any other moment are you more conscious of the fact that this is just someone's dad right here. Like, this is just someone's annoying dad who's like gotten really into rockets in his 50s or whatever, and that's his thing now, and that's how he deals with being washed, is that he's really into rockets now, and that's what he goes into his man cave and he makes little model rockets and he plays with them and he throws them around.
The Breaking Bad subplot where Hank collects minerals.
Yeah, except
Jesus Christ, Marie, they're minerals.
Jesus Christ, it's a Spitfire, actually. Anyway, that's Dave Mustaine in this era, and I find it too normal to feel anything about it, really. He's just another dude at this point. And he surrounds himself with good musicians. He still has some of that talent that he had back in the 80s. and he does what he can with it. And so I can't resent this in any way, because it is, it's the sound of a dude getting back up when he's been kicked in the fucking throat and still going. And it has all of the same pitfalls as the shit he's been doing before that, but he, at the very least, manages to not make it any worse than it has been. So at this point, with a Megadeth record in the fucking 2020s, I'll take it.
I like 80% agree with you. It's just like, just make it shorter, man. Rust in Peace is 34 minutes long. Like, come on, man. That's the secret to all these fucking earlier Thrash albums, is that they're fucking short. Why? Like, again, even fucking Metallica is falling victim to this. It's like they can't let their precious little egos, every single album needs to be like an hour plus. And it's like that you cannot sustain this unless you are in your prime, unless you are in the 80s. Like, you all need to recognize your limitations. Just release a fucking deluxe edition with all the songs you don't use on the proper album, or fucking something. Like, please, I'm begging you. It will make me so much more willing to meet this shit halfway. But it's just like, it's the same shit. The problem is that it's just like the playing is all good, but it's just like, this is an album that's functionally worthless. Is that you just, if you want to hear the good playing, go listen to the good album that's shorter than it.
Yeah. Alrighty. Favorite tracks and ratings for The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead. We'll go in reverse this time. I'll go first. My 3 favorite tracks are, I'll say the opening track, Mission to Mars, and We'll Be Back. Least favorite track is probably Junkie, but Soldier On's pretty awful as well. So is Life in Hell. I mean, God, we could be here all day. 5 out of 10. Like you say, Jake, if this were 20 minutes shorter, I might even give this a 6. Who fucking knows? But it's a light 5 at this.
Mission to Mars. I actually kind of enjoy This Planet's on Fire.
Yeah, it's not a bad closer.
Sammy Hagar aside, how are you gonna make your professional name Sammy?
It's pretty bad.
It's not.
It's just, that's what we call a sandwich here. Like that's
yeah.
That's yeah. Yeah. Like when I was in school as a little kid, I would be like, Mum, can you make me a ham and cheese Sammy for lunch?
Yeah, no, we got it, dude. We're not missing. This is something about the because it just took me out.
It was a really perfect delivery.
Because got the best smoker's weave out of me. Wheeze. Probably Will Be Back, I'll say as well. Least favorite, definitely Celebutante. Really making commentary that was kind of annoying when Trent Reznor did it on the Fragile. Be quiet, David. Yeah, I will also give this a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, my favorite thing, This Planet's on Fire's got some like that's the point at which I can say that that's one of the few songs on the album that legitimately has riffs that are so good that the rest of it doesn't really matter. But my 3 least favorite tracks gotta be Junkie, Life in Hell, and Celebutante. Yeah, 4 out of 10. I like Ryley, I would give this a point higher if it was simply shorter. But
right, which means that on the whole, we get an average rating of 4.7 for Megadeth's The Sick, The Dying, and The Queen. All right, let us know what you think of either of the albums we have discussed today, the Callous Daoboys, Celebrity Therapist, or Megadeth's new album. We want to hear from you in the comments below. We want to hear your takes, your opinions, whether you agree with us, whether you disagree, what your relationships are with either of these bands as well. Hit us up in the comments below as well. Let us know what you want to review. Also, what you want us to review also in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel if you have not already. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you can head on over to the YouTube link in the description and do those things if you want to support us. And if you want to support us even further, you can hit the join button on our YouTube page for just $1 a month. You can become a member of the Jams and Tea family. Get yourself entitled to perks, such as your name and the title call of every video on this channel. Plus, if you want to recommend us some music to listen to and talk about, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, the Dallas Cowboys, driven